I'm telling you, this is exactly what we've been waiting for. Bitcoin is performing incredibly well amid global turmoil, and it looks like patterns are repeating themselves. At first, Bitcoin gets pulled down just a little by global unrest, but then it makes a massive rebound, and within just a few days, we're back in a recovery phase. Let's take a close look at what's happening here. On top of that, we've seen massive purchases from Strategy, who are buying 10,000 Bitcoin here without diluting a single share. This is also a historic moment that is currently happening here at Strategy and Saylor. We have Metaplanet, who have now accumulated over 10,000 Bitcoin, and just yesterday alone saw a performance of over 25% in a single day, or today, depending on the time difference. And when you look, apparently, Iran wants to make a peace deal with the US, which of course is having a positive effect on the markets. Donald Trump wants to make a move here, and in addition, he wants to push through a Bitcoin ETF with Truth Social, and there are even more exciting things we need to take a look at. A lot is happening again, really a lot. But first, go ahead and hit the like button below so Bitcoin can prevail. Yeah, so that peace can quickly return to the world, these videos get shared. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit the subscribe button below. We're just about to hit 40,000. Let's fucking go. But first, let's start with Adam Back, who is now actually calling on the richest person in the world to go 100% into Bitcoin, because Ricardo Salinas said that he's about to go all in 100% into Bitcoin. He already has 80% of his portfolio in Bitcoin, but apparently wants to put even more into Bitcoin now. And Adam Back is urging him to go even further into Bitcoin. That probably also shows us that Adam Back himself is 100% in Bitcoin. Adam Back, who already has probably been all in on Bitcoin since then and is massively convinced by the technology, and now is even reinvesting in other, yes, Bitcoin treasury companies. And we'll also take a look at the conflicts in the Middle East in a moment. But first, we need to see what's currently happening with the Bitcoin treasury companies, because that's really crazy too. We have Strategy here, which is now buying 10,000 Bitcoin, and Strategy is raising the money for this by issuing new preferred shares called Strive and issuing Strike and STRF. MicroStrategy now holds 592,100 Bitcoin, so they haven't quite managed to break the 600,000 mark yet. But what's really, really special, now listen up carefully, not a single share was diluted here, and that's exactly what Saylor also adds. And they didn't sell a single share of NSTR to do it. And here he's basically calling out or quoting Jim Chanos, because Chanos basically shorted MicroStrategy and went long on Bitcoin. He's a very well-known short trader who took short positions against MicroStrategy, simply because he said, hey, you can't just dilute all your shares. Some people have always said, yeah, MicroStrategy is like a central bank, not printing their own money, but printing their own shares. And now we see that with these preferred shares, MicroStrategy can accumulate so much money that they can acquire 10,000 Bitcoin within a single week. And that's what I pointed out to you 4 weeks ago or so. Hey, look, how will things develop here at Strategy? Will they use the equity side more? Or will they rely more on the ATM side? And now they're actually no longer using the ATMs, but are instead really using the preferred shares, which in my opinion is a very, very good sign, because that was still a sticking point where people said, okay, the MicroStrategy story can only work out in the long run if the stock dilution is kept in check. Of course, if you have a high MNF, if you have a large premium, meaning the stock is trading well above the value of the Bitcoin, then you can always dilute certain amounts of shares. But that only works as long as the MNF lasts. And then you have to come up with other options. For example, Metaplanet, which we'll talk about in a moment, has an even higher MNF. So in theory, they could do a lot more ATMs than Strategy here. It's not that easy to understand, but to put it simply, the fewer ATMs there are potentially, well, you can't necessarily say it's better, but it does mean that critics are basically put in their place and pushed back. And now the criticism just bounces off. And Michael Saylor is basically showing all the critics, hey, he can raise money in other ways too. He has many options here to raise money. Now he's just completely 100% flexible. And then for me, this is the story of, well, maybe even the story of the year, but definitely the story of the day, Metaplanet, which is buying Bitcoin again for 30 billion yen. Here, the CEO, Simon Yarovich, says they've accumulated 1,000 Bitcoin here for $117 million. So far, they've achieved a Bitcoin yield here of 266% on an annual basis. That's unbelievably crazy. That means the Bitcoin per share ratio has increased by that much. And that's absolutely insane. For a Bitcoin treasury company, this Bitcoin yield is a core metric. Of course, you also look at the MNF and other things. Those things are also interesting, but you can't compare a regular stock to a Bitcoin treasury company like this. A lot of people just don't get that. Like, for example, The short traders who are building short positions against MicroStrategy here and keep taking profits. And now, Metaplanet also has 10,000 Bitcoin, and the original goal was actually to accumulate 21,000 Bitcoins. They've now raised it to 210,000 Bitcoin, and by next year at the latest, they could actually become a real competitor to MicroStrategy if they really manage to buy 210,000 Bitcoin by the end of next year. But according to current projections, it could even happen sooner because I'm not sure. 210,000, was it by 2027 or 2026? Let me know in the comments below, but I think it was 2026. Of course, Strategy will also buy more Bitcoin by then, but yeah, this is definitely the first small competitor for Strategy here. Even though we see, okay, Strategy buys 10,000 Bitcoin, Metaplanet buys 1,000 Bitcoin, so there's a difference of almost, a factor of 10 between them. But the crazy thing is, Metaplanet is pumping way harder than Strategy here, because of course, Metaplanet has a much stronger leverage effect at the beginning than MicroStrategy does now. It's just like with market capitalization. If you have some kind of shitcoin or something with a small market cap, you can pump it much faster than if you already have a flagship like Bitcoin. Although, I don't want to compare Metaplanet to a shitcoin or anything like that. But some people always do that. They compare the Bitcoin treasury companies to shitcoins. And of course, there's a lot of gambling involved, and I'm sure there are some sketchy companies out there. And some of these companies will probably crash and burn, so you have to be careful. There are third-party risks and so on. So do your own research. Then we have Trump, who is now launching his own Bitcoin ETF and also an Ethereum ETF with TREZOR, or rather, he has filed for them. So he has applied for them. And that's definitely another step forward. I also uploaded the video earlier with the Ford documentary. If you haven't seen it yet, you definitely need to check it out, where it basically gets leaked that Donald Trump now has 60% of his portfolio in crypto. 60%. And is hardly making any notable gains with his real estate portfolio anymore. Instead, he's just switched over to Bitcoin, to crypto, because he realizes there's a lot more money to be made there. Even with his true social media platform, he now has a massive Bitcoin strategy running, because he's noticed that with his usual business philosophy or business strategy, he's not making any money anymore. So he basically has to bet on Bitcoin just to make any money at all. And of course, he has a huge incentive to keep pumping Bitcoin prices higher, you know? And now we come to the tense situation here in the Middle East. And what's happening here is really interesting. What we're seeing is that the futures markets around the world were expecting a de-escalation this morning. Oil prices are making up for their losses, and stock market futures are turning positive. We and the markets are expecting that there will soon be a peace agreement between Israel and Iran, and that's what makes this so exciting. Bitcoin has gotten off to a very, very strong start here. The stock markets have also started off very, very well. I mentioned before that the stock market opening would be very, very interesting here, especially as the markets start trading again after the conflict, and Bitcoin is reacting to that as well, and so on. However, it seems that there are definitely also signs of escalation. There is still unrest. At this point, we can't really say that we are already in a de-escalation phase. There are some initial indications of that, but we are not in de-escalation yet. And the fact that Bitcoin has performed so well here, consistently staying above 100,000, basically also confirms what BlackRock has always said. Bitcoin is an asset that benefits from crisis, from unrest, from uncertainty. Larry Fink has said this in interviews, and there's also the BlackRock report and so on about it. And that's just crazy. And I've told you over and over again, if this happens, if Bitcoin increasingly becomes a risk-off asset, then it will get even more interesting for even larger groups of investors, because many investors aren't interested in maximum returns. They're mainly interested in low risk, low volatility, and minimal maximum drawdowns. And those are the institutional investors, the ones with big capital and so on. They think differently. They sometimes have issues with volatility. They think differently than small investors. And now there's also on the platform, there's now also a statistic here where you can see the chances of a new US Iran nuclear deal happening this year are currently rising dramatically, now already up to 45%. This happened just a few minutes after the Wall Street Journal reported that Iran is seeking de-escalation with the US and Israel. Of course, that's a positive thing, just like with all the tariff issues. If there's de-escalation, not escalation but de-escalation, that's positive. If there's de-escalation here, it's positive. De-escalation is always positive, yeah. According to Reuters, Iran is urging Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Oman to ask President Trump to put pressure on Israel to agree to an immediate ceasefire. In return, Iran would offer the US flexibility in the nuclear negotiations, according to Reuters. So, this is definitely something to view as very, very positive. And yeah, let's just see how things develop from here. That doesn't necessarily mean things will continue this way. It could also escalate again at any time. And of course, there could still be some major sell-offs at any moment. But we've really seen that Bitcoin has remained relatively stable here above 100,000 US dollars. I just got off the phone with my dad, and he reminded me, hey, when I come back to Germany, we need to take a photo, a 100,000 US dollar photo, because back then I said, the next time we see each other, Bitcoin will be over 100,000. And that was about 8 months ago or so, the last time we saw each other. And I don't even remember where Bitcoin was at that time. Yeah, I just checked. And back in October, Bitcoin was around, well, 66,000, something like that. And even then I said, hey, the next time we see each other, Bitcoin will be at 100,000. And now the chances are very, very high that this will happen, unless Bitcoin completely crashes in the next few days. Of course, this has nothing to do with clairvoyant abilities. You just have to put 2 and 2 together. Bitcoin is a number go up machine, so it was obvious that this would happen sooner or later. But now there's another interesting assessment here from the Kobasi letter. They actually make a call, or let's say, a conclusion, directed at everyone who's calling for a third world war. Even if the probability of a third world war were only 50% right now, the S&P 500 wouldn't be just 2% away from a new all-time high. In fact, the S&P 500 would drop by more than 30%. The price of gold would be over 5,000 US dollars per ounce, and the price of oil would be over 100 US dollars per barrel. If the probability of a third world war were at 90%, the S&P 500 would drop by more than 50%. The price of gold would be over 10,000 US dollars per ounce, and the price of oil would be 200 US dollars per barrel. Despite all the headlines, the markets are saying that we are far from a third world war. So that's definitely the assessment. And it's one you can certainly share here as well. I know there are always people who say we're already in World War III and so on. And on certain levels, that might even be true. Maybe definitely when it comes to information. Let's say propaganda, disinformation, and so on. And of course, also partly economic manipulation, yes, behind the scenes maneuvering, and the way economic conflicts are waged. And of course, we also have internal conflicts and so on. So I also understand the people who say, okay, we already have something like a silent World War III or something like that. I don't know. Everyone can think what they want. Everyone can have their own opinion about it. The fact is, the markets are not pricing in that there is an active global conflict here. And now we even have tendencies toward de-escalation, which is of course always positive. Peace is always better than people bashing each other's heads in. I mean, every kid knows that, but somehow people still can't manage it, or at least the 1 or 2% who end up bashing each other's heads in. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll definitely put a link down below to 21 Bitcoin. Here you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. Use the code Bitcoin Hotel, and you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. That's my absolute recommendation. That way, you'll be all set here, and I'll see you around. See you then. Peace out.